out just how ready cloud is for real-world broadcast operations. Indeed, is it ready for prime time? You only have to look around the halls of IBC this year to see cloud is everywhere. All of the vendors are talking about how they're adopting cloud. Many broadcasters and content companies are interested in adopting it. You'll even notice this year that to mark the year of the cloud at IBC, there are plenty of clouds in the sky depositing rain on us as well. I'm Rob Ambrose, a consultant and analyst in the industry, and I've been kind of following the rise of cloud in our industry over the past few years. And I'm constantly amazed at the potential that it has to transform the way that we work, to transform broadcast operations. But equally, I'm aware of the hurdles still to overcome. So really what today's session is all about is cutting through that jargon and the hype and the spin and sharing some of the experiences of some of our leading broadcasters here who have adopted cloud and embraced it. They'll be sharing some of the benefits, what works, what doesn't work, and some of the advice that they can share with you based on what they've done and learned. We'll also be hearing from Google, one of the big public cloud providers and one that's making a big splash in the media and entertainment space. We'll be unveiling some of their cloud tools and showing how you can use those as well. So before we get into that, I just wanted to share with you one practical point, if my clicker will work. Yes, it does. You have a chance to participate in the session through the IBC app. So if you go to your IBC app and click on the live Q&A button, you can write questions there, and you can see the questions and vote on your favorite questions. And the good ones will come through to us on the iPad here, and we'll put that to the panel as we go through. So use the app, and you can ask questions, and we'll try to respond to them. Just while Jeff Kember from Google is getting set up over there, I wanted to share a couple of data points as well from the latest IABM end user survey. So, in other words, who's actually using cloud? How big is it already? So this is the latest survey that the IABM has done, just announced this morning. And they track from an end user perspective, in other words, broadcasters and content companies, they track exactly who's using cloud already, among many other things. So from the latest research, they're asking, how likely are you to deploy some sort of cloud-based technology over the next 2 to 3 years? And if you look at the kind of top results, that sums up to 93% of broadcast and media companies are either already using cloud or planning to do so. So that's pretty much everyone. So if you're not yet using cloud, you could well be one of the many people who are planning to do so. The other question IABM's asked this year that's interesting is for those people who are adopting cloud technology, to what extent they've already virtualized operations. And our panel will share more in a moment about the extent to which virtualization and cloud works together. But it's interesting that there's a very high percentage of people who are pretty much, nearly a quarter there, more or less completely virtualized of cloud, broadcast companies using cloud, and well over a third who are kind of pretty much there. So the uptake of cloud is significant. There are still some challenges to overcome, and there are new cloud capabilities coming along all the time. So that's what we're going to explore in today's session. Jeff, are you set to go? Good, excellent. So let me introduce you next. Jeff Kember is the guy at Google Cloud who's going to talk about what Google Cloud Platform is doing there. He spans, I think, both creativity and technology, which I think is always a great combination. So as a CG supervisor, Jeff has some great film credits to his name: Pirates of the Caribbean, Harry Potter, X-Men, and Star Wars. Now what he's going to do for the first part of today's session is share what he's doing for media and entertainment companies to help them make the best use of the Google Cloud Platform. So Jeff, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, thank you so much for coming this morning. My name is Jeff Kember. I am the technical director for media for Google, and I'm excited to be here to chat with you today. We're going to ask the question and answer, how far can it go? It really is as far as you want to take it. The exciting aspect and working with broadcast customers for me is the fact that there really are no limits at this point in terms of what workloads we can run and how we can run them. So in terms of using the cloud, there's a number of differentiators that exist in terms of the architecture being scalable, highly secure, and that we can then run really efficient, parallel, wide workloads on the cloud. But most importantly, it's not an interesting conversation for me in terms of what does a gigabyte cost or how much does a core cost. It's a much more interesting conversation in terms of what happens when you put your data on the cloud. What can you do with it? And that's where the machine learning technology that I'll chat about today comes into play. So in terms of putting the user first, Google does that with its own products. And the broadcasters and media companies we work with obviously do that with the work that they're doing. And we really feel that the importance of this is immersive content, the idea that it's highly personalized, you can get it anywhere on any screen, and it's seamless to the viewer. So we can talk a little bit about targeted advertisements and the ability to have live assemble edits in the cloud, and the complete end-to-end pipeline, in fact. So from focus on the user, each of these products across the top have 1 billion users each using them. And then we have a variety of other business solutions that exist, including Widebind and DoubleClick. So happy to chat with anyone after the session about those. So from a cloud standpoint, this is the same infrastructure that Google runs its own services on. And we made a roughly $30 billion investment over the last 3 years in an effort to be able to ensure that we are at the forefront of not only an infrastructure standpoint, but the hardware and software stack, as well as the offerings we have. So the idea of running on the cloud, though, gives you the ability to not only be a content creator and to be able to do everything from raw camera ingest all the way through to an editorial pipeline and distribution. We'll chat about that in a few minutes. So for me, the idea of being able to say, how much scale can we have? We have transcoding technology, for instance, that allows you to take all of the work that you have and transcode it in parallel. And that's both on demand and for live streaming. So this slide is an end-to-end production workflow. And I've broken it up into 4 different pieces here. But for those who are content creators at the show, you'll recognize the camera raw ingest and the debayer. Doing the machine learning pass is something that's new. That provides the metadata tagging, so you have consistent metadata with camera data. And that's everything from OCR in the slate right on through to doing image recognition of what and who's in the scene, which gives you the ability later on to be able to say, I would like every take of this specific actor who's wearing these glasses. And you'd be able to get all of the takes that were shot raw in whatever transcoded format you want. The idea then of being able to move forward and say, well, we want to have a daily system, but we want this team to be decentralized. So if we're shooting somewhere overseas and you want the editorial team to be in London, that can be done. Currently, you tend to have to collocate them. But in this model, you're able to peer into the cloud and make that work. The editorial and selects pipeline. This is something that we're working with a number of customers to virtualize and really bring to fruition. That requires cloud storage for file systems, as well as remote desktop over a thin client or over a workstation. And then, of course, you take advantage of our global network to be able to do that. The visual effects pipeline, which is one that I've spent a lot of time with in my professional career before Google, the VFX companies are primarily using us for compute at this point for rendering. However, there are a number that are using the cloud for simulation and compositing workloads. And what's interesting about that is these are incredibly computationally intensive models that need to be run. And we're looking at anywhere from 40 to 80 gigs per frame of simulation data. That's too big to move around back on-prem and such. So the idea of being able to use remote desktops and being able to peer into that data is enabling customers to be able to expand their entire production workflow into the cloud. Ultimately, being able to have a digital intermediate and color correction in the cloud, that becomes the next step into distribution. Now, I realize I feel like I'm trivializing a little bit the whole distribution day and date global on a single tag at this point, because it actually represents anywhere from 8 to 12 steps. But the Envato product that we have is intended to be a complete end-to-end distribution model. We'll chat about that in a moment. We have quite a few customers who are contractually obligated to store 3 copies of things. And the idea of having just stacks of LTOs and the retrieval time is challenging. It's anywhere from 3 days to 10 days for the customers I've surveyed in the broadcast community to be able to get data back online from LTO. Now, if the tape robot is available and the tape is sitting beside it and someone knows which tape it's on, you can online it that day, no problem. But if you have to dig through a database and find out where it is, and it's off-site, it's a day or 2 to get it, and if you need a production team to actually go through and rebuild the directory structure, it sometimes requires multiple loadings to be able to get the assets you need back online. The customers who are using our long-term cold line archive solution, they're able to get the data back in milliseconds. Across our entire storage framework, we're single-digit milliseconds, low single-digit milliseconds for retrieval, and that's globally. And we're finding that customers who are backing up on LTO still, who are also using cloud, they're not retrieving off LTO at all. It's going off-site, it's staying off-site for contractual requirements, but they're using the cloud purely as a retrieval mechanism. You also get the ability of, once you move the pipeline to the cloud, you're in a scenario where everything is then cloud native at that point. You're peering into the data. You're not having to move it back and forth in a hybrid fashion. And that's really where we see, I think, some of the most exciting pipelines that are being built out today. It also gives the ability to have machine learning dropped in at a number of places in the pipeline and be able to have that metadata run along and be available to you later on. So let's say, for example, you just released a 2K version of a show and you've been asked to do a 4K HDR variant. Instead of taking 7 to 10 days to online it, you can online it in literally seconds to get the data and then minutes to pull it down. You get it at line rate when you're direct connected to us. You can then do all of the DI you need to do, push it around, master the HDR, and then use our network to be able to globally distribute that to the various licensees that you have, or just back up to the client. And again, we're seeing that end-to-end workflow really compelling. So as an example, Disney's film The Jungle Book, Technicolor and MPC rendered roughly 80% of this film on our platform last fall. And this represents the first time that we're actually able to talk about it. We've been working with a number of customers and doing this for quite a while now, but we've had security conversational restrictions, shall we say, on what we can and can't talk about. This paper became submitted to SIGGRAPH earlier this year, and therefore it's available for us to talk about. But what this allowed MPC to do is spin up a significant number of cores in our Belgium data center, and they were based in London, and they were able to collaborate with their teams elsewhere in the world, and at the same time still had incredibly quick renders. What they found was that instead of it taking a day or 2 to get it off the farm, they could put individual shots on the farm and do it wildly parallel. I think that's an important concept to keep in mind for any of the workloads you want to run on the cloud, is the fact that the scalability is there. And so instead of saying, well, I have a fixed amount of compute on-prem, and I'm going to have to bin pack my jobs, and the transcode is going to take 4 days, or the render is going to take a day and a half or 2 days. Instead, you can spin up an individual VM per frame and run that individual frame and then shut the VM down when you've completed the frame. That allows you to save on artist time and director time and producer time, and be able to deliver projects either at a higher fidelity or with more iterations to satisfy the director's need, or in a shorter time period. Google's commitment to an end-to-end platform includes our Daydream platform and the jump camera, and this is an example of the second generation Yi jump camera that we have, and it has a fantastic array of cameras around it, plus one pointing up for a domed camera. But what's most compelling about this for me is not just the image acquisition, but the stitching on the back end. So you're able to upload the content from this camera, and we have customers who are putting a significant amount of footage up. And the SLA is a reasonable period of time, but they're finding their normal experience is about 3 hours, regardless of how much content they put up, because it's running on the Google 3 backend. We schedule it, we stitch it, and instead of them taking roughly a week of an artist's time in order to get a stereo 360 stitch working, it comes right off the camera. We keep it on the cloud as well if you wish, and you can distribute it either through your own channels, our CDN, someone else's CDN, or through YouTube. So in terms of global network, the idea of being able to have massive connectivity. We're the only provider that has gone and leased ships and laid fiber at scale under the world's ocean. We own the fiber. If you jump on in Helsinki or get off in Rio or go to Tokyo, Sydney, New York, wherever you are in the world, you're on our private network. So we're encrypted in motion and at rest, and the opportunity to be able to have that flexibility, the data can automatically be cached and moved. So if you use our cloud storage, GCS, our object store, you're in a scenario where if you start reading that data in Los Angeles, that data will then be moved and cached locally, and now you're getting incredibly quick access to it. But if you have a directorial team that's based in Frankfurt, for instance, they will be able to get access to that data incredibly quickly as well. Many broadcasters I work with who are running on other types of systems typically have a small team of people whose job it is to move the data around. And if they're not on the cloud, there's definitely a team of people who are making sure that they're essentially rsyncing the data between a whole bunch of different file systems on dedicated lines or on VPNs over the internet. This next slide talks just a little more detail about the cyan links are links that are already in, and the red links are links that are going in or have been lit recently. So we're aggressively increasing the global network footprint that we have. And the little blue dots are edge cache nodes. So a service like YouTube, for instance, if you're in Norway and you want to watch compelling cat videos, the top 300 cat videos are going to be cached in that local cache, so we're not hitting the data center on the backhaul. We're able to get your cat videos with super low latency, and we know that's important. Frankfurt opened up recently, just in the last week, and so we have been opening a microcluster regional data center, depending how you want to phrase it, but we've been opening local compute around the world roughly once every 45 days. So again, for customers who are asking for, we want compute in Montreal or in Southern California or in Tokyo or in Europe in different locations. And we have it in Frankfurt now, as well as Belgium, as well as London. And the Netherlands is opening shortly. So the idea of being able to have this video available globally is, again, I find really compelling and a relevant use case for the cloud. This is the wheel from Envato, and this represents the commitment Google has to this video space, and at the same time, this represents a complete end-to-end solution. So if we move forward and look at this from a machine learning enhancement standpoint, these are the various steps in which ML can assist. Right from the podium, this is the most photographed slide. Excellent. Okay, so in terms of live streaming, we have, again, the ability to insert ads. We can do so in an intelligent fashion with a model. Clipping, the idea of being able to make an automated highlights reel. And there's a bunch of research work that we've done where we're showing various sport activities going on, and you can say, I'd like to see an automated highlight clip of player number 5, or I'm a fan of this team, and the other people watching are a fan of the other team. Let's generate an automated highlights reel that features the team that we're interested in, or on the granularity level, individual players. And again, our goal is not to replace the human editor or operator. The goal is to augment and make it more efficient. So when that game is over, as the game is being played, that automated clip reel is being generated based on the metadata that's derived from the live broadcast. And you can also see, I mean, again, these are all ML use cases that are put across the entire pipeline. So Univision made a move to us in the 2016-2017 timeframe. And for them, it was a transition from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. And this is a really important situation for them because they wanted to take advantage of the scaling of the cloud and the cost efficiencies associated with it. And they wanted to be able to turn their work around more quickly and not be bound by an on-premises data center. So the idea of being able to transition their business, again, to an OpEx model has given them a significant amount of flexibility. They've had to change a little bit internally some of their workflows, just in terms of how production works and how the distribution is being thought of. But they're finding the advantages are significant and greater than they anticipated in terms of shortening workflow production times. We also have a transcoding API. Within the Envato family, we've broken that portion out, and if you wish, to a la carte. I have customers who use ColorFront for debayering and transcoding, or they're using Envato's transcoding API, or they're running FFmpeg as an open source solution. It's common to be able to say, here's my transcoding workload, and here are the different flavors that we need to be able to run in order to be able to make it work efficiently and cost effectively. So machine learning is something that I'm excited about. I work with it frequently. So for the nerds in the room, I love hardware as well, and the idea of CPUs, great. We all know that they're multiple threads, very diverse instruction set. GPUs, graphics processing units, are a reduced instruction set, but wildly parallel in threads. TPUs are our name for TensorFlow processing units. It's an ASIC, it's an application-specific integrated circuit. What does that mean? It means it's software code that's been put into hardware. They're incredibly expensive to make. They take a fair amount of time to produce, and if you make a mistake, they're not worth anything. You can't go back and modify the code. However, you get roughly an order of magnitude speed improvement over running on GPU. What does this mean for you? Well, it means you can get results back more quickly. Google's ability to win AlphaGo was highly dependent on the performance to iterate on TPUs to be able to get individual turn-based information back. And that means that broadcast workloads can be accelerated as well on TPUs. No one else has this level of performance just because of the time it took to invest and to build these. The other advantage of this is just from an environmental standpoint, the energy density of the TPUs is just phenomenal. You can see on the bottom right side, those are TPUs racked up, and we're looking at just ridiculous amount of flops coming out of these. So open source TensorFlow, the idea of being able to build your own models. We have stateless models you can use. If you wish to use our video API, our vision API, video intelligence, any of those, we have the opportunity for you to work against our models. And that means it's stateless. You can upload your content, derive the metadata from it, and then pull the metadata back as JSON, and you're all set. And we didn't look at the data. We didn't keep it. We didn't train our models on it. It's private. We don't know what you ran on it. You just paid us to run on the API, and that's it. However, if you do wish to improve our models, you can partner with us and use your content to basically improve the models. We will kind of all converge at one point on improved models, and this helps everyone get there a little more quickly. Many customers, however, want to have a custom model for some reason, and in that context, we run with a hybrid mode, and then they can train their own model, and that gives them the ability to have access to some technologies that perhaps are very specific to their workflows. So in terms of the Video Intelligence API, this is the similar technology to Google Photos in terms of the ability to look at individual images, except it's on wheels. So you can run entire broadcast and film archives against this API and get highly consistent metadata from it, and then integrate it into your MAM, and now you have a compelling way to be able to search content really quickly with high fidelity. So this is an example of being able to say verbally into your phone, I'd like to see a short piece on Chot, and I'd like to assemble this together, please. And you just ask your phone to do it, and then bam. We look at relevance, sentiment analysis, what's exciting, if someone is chopping vegetables, or if they're putting it in the pan and flames are coming out, or if they're winning a prize. Those are all different sentiments. There's different emotional values on the actors in the scene and the participants. So this is an example of being able to assemble out a clip based on machine learning technology. This is intended to be a two-screen setup, and in this scenario, with the two-screen setup, you're looking at your primary screen to watch the show, and then your secondary device, your phone in this case, is linked to that experience, and you're able to see through machine learning that these are the shoes that these actors are looking at in the scene, and these shoes are available for you to purchase directly. So these are just examples of the technologies that we currently have, and these are use cases associated with that. So I mentioned Google Photos a moment ago. This is, again, a free application on iOS or Android, and you're able to upload thousands and tens of thousands of photographs against it, run the machine learning tech on the back end. You don't have to do anything. You just type in a search field, and you can see that it works well and it's compelling. Translate, we have the ability to translate between 80 and 100 different languages, and we have a new neural net model as well, which from a performance standpoint isn't incremental. It's actually a step function. Instead of using more of a pattern matching system that's been used, which can only get you so close, the new neural net systems are a completely machine learning language translation system. There's a really great article in the New York Times December of last year that just explains the state of the art for ML as well as this neural net system. This is a real-time example. The model is downloaded to the phone, and you can point any phone at a sign and get it translated real-time for you. So Our cloud, we think, is open and scalable, and it's intelligent in terms of the machine learning technology, and that's an area where we're highly performant. And the fact that we give you the control to be able to work with your media in the context that you wish, we're excited to chat with you about a transition to the cloud. And that's it. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So Jeff Kember there from the Google Cloud Platform. Some super exciting tools and capabilities there available in the cloud, right from the camera through to how that content becomes monetized with the consumers. What we're going to do for the rest of the session is get into a bit of a discussion with some of the leading broadcasters and content creation and post-production companies who are using cloud tools from Google and Amazon and Microsoft and others, and really finding out what they're doing with them and how they're using some of these tools to actually enhance their own business. So some quick introductions. Tom Griffiths, over to my left, is Director of Broadcast and Distribution Technology at ITV in the UK. I recall that Tom once told me in his ideal world there would be no on-premise technology at all. So he's probably not best friends with the real estate agents that ITV uses. But we'll find out how close he is to realizing his dream. Thomas Edwards, in the middle, is Vice President of Engineering and Operations at Fox Networks, Engineering and Ops in the US, and he oversees the introduction of basically all the new cool stuff, whether it's UHD or OTT or IP infrastructure, and of course, cloud. And next to me, Simon Green is founder and CEO of Green Rock, which is a creative content agency and post-production house in the UK. So he's the creative one among us, along with Jeff. And started off as a video editor, but now has really been focused on embracing cloud tools to accelerate his business, both in terms of transforming post-production and also in terms of creating more brand content. So we're going to get into a bit of a discussion. Don't forget you can ask questions too using the IBC app. Tom, firstly, your dream is to not have any buildings anymore. How much of ITV's operations are in the cloud already, and where are you at on your journey?
I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is it is a journey. What we're not doing, I mean, whilst that, you're right in the sense that is an aspiration, what we're not doing is just a wholesale lift and shift from on-premise infrastructure into the cloud all in one go. It is very much a journey that we're on. And this next slide, which talks a little bit about kind of some elements of the kind of broadcast and distribution chain part of our business rather than the production end of it, gives a bit of a flavour, kind of a colour-coded flavour of where we've got to. I mean, actually, the first place we adopted cloud actually was with Google. I mean, you know, we were one of the very early adopters of G Suite, and you know, we use that extensively, you know, in terms of kind of big enterprises in the UK. You know, and that's been a great example of itself about the kind of, you know, it's not just about replacing a kind of applications on the laptop. It's been about the collaboration that's opened up for us. You know, and that of itself has kind of unlocked us from the desk in many ways. And what I've got on here is just something, as I say, talking a little bit about the chain. And I guess what I'm saying on here is we're at different parts of that journey depending on which part of the broadcast and distribution ecosystem you're on. Right out at the left end, if you think of some of the kind of the planning and business systems we use, we're right in the middle at the moment of migrating that to cloud. And what we're doing there is kind of replacing legacy systems either by rebuilding those ourselves, and when we're doing that, it is a cloud-first strategy. All of that is being built natively on cloud platforms. Or where we're buying product, we're looking for product which is SaaS. And when we look at SaaS, actually, we look quite carefully at what people mean by that. You know, is it really just in some data center somewhere, and are they making the best use of infrastructure in terms of how they do that?
And a quick question, Tom, why? What's the benefit that approach brings you?
I think there are a number of things. One of the key things in that area actually that's kind of really flushed through has been the question of agility. I mean, economics is an angle, and you know there is the whole kind of OPEX versus CAPEX discussion there. And actually, we're not anti-CAPEX necessarily, so that's not actually the real driver. The real driver has been about agility. It's being able to spin up the infrastructure much more quickly. It's actually simplified a lot of the kind of configuration of that, getting away from having to deal with some of the challenges of diverse on-premise infrastructure. And the scalability point that Jeff mentioned as well. You know, in that area, for example, most of the environments that we're creating, we're turning them off at night. Most of those operations are kind of daytime operations, and on our cloud platform, we switch them off at night automatically. Nobody has to do that. It just switches itself off, switches itself on in the morning, which actually helps the kind of economic point in terms of the cost savings. And actually, we just think we can deploy our software faster without being kind of distracted by the infrastructure build, which frankly isn't our real capability, and it doesn't of itself, it doesn't differentiate. So, you know, in that area, we're kind of going wholesale down that direction. And it is a bit of a journey. You know, we're partway through that. We haven't done all of that. And that's as much as anything else about us finding the right way to kind of unpick those applications which are right at the heart of our business and not just kind of do a like-for-like replacement, but actually enable a whole different way of operating as we go. I think when we kind of talk about content preparation, and what I mean here is really is less about the production side, but once we've got a produced asset. So this is kind of preparing content for VOD. It's you know, some of the other processes that go around kind of creating the packages of content for delivery on distribution platforms. We're very much on that journey in that space at the moment. I'll talk about a use case in a moment that gives an example of that. Live production, it's a little bit further away, I think, in that space, but you know, we are very much looking at the opportunities there. In terms of on-demand publishing, you know, and that chain right through to the consumer for kind of direct-to-consumer and OTT, it's pretty much all running out of the cloud now. We know we've made that transition over the last few years, and that kind of scalability point is really key for us there. You know, giving us that ability to scale up. You know, we've Faz talked yesterday on the panel about Love Island. You know, and we've seen huge scaling in terms of numbers of viewers for something like that. And to be able to do that, it's not just about the CDN, it's actually about some of the upstream components that go with that as well. And that ability to really make that work like that has been pretty key for us. I guess the area where we're early on that journey, and to be honest, one of the things I'm looking at the show here is how we're going to get there over the next few years, is kind of the traditional live play-out environment. And I think there, it's not a question of can cloud do it. I have no doubt it will be able to, but there are some technical challenges to overcome and some functional challenges. You know, today I think you could get kind of thematic channel without live. There are people out there now doing that in the cloud. It gets a bit more difficult when you're talking about live reactive channels, and there's a bit of a way to go on that yet. So just to give a couple of very, very quick examples. One of the things we've done over the last few years is to use cloud to help us simplify our content distribution. You know, our traditional model, probably like lots of people, has that's grown organically, and traditionally it's been kind of an on-premise solution with a different content delivery pipeline for every individual one of our syndication customers, and we've got 30-odd, and always going up all the time in terms of endpoints, both our own but also third-party syndication partners. And actually, that just really hasn't been scalable for us, both in terms of the complexity about having kind of completely different pipelines for each vendor, but also actually just the infrastructure and the systems you've got to do underneath it. And we've moved to this different model, which we call the shared pipeline. And essentially what we're doing here is we're creating a mezzanine asset, kind of high-quality mezzanine asset, and a package of kind of consistent metadata and a consistent licensing model and so on. And we're putting that content once into AWS, and then sending automated notifications to our syndication partners, who can then go and draw that back. Now, quite a lot of those people are themselves using AWS, so actually it makes it quite easy for them to just kind of do a transfer within AWS. And that's what that's done is two things. One thing is it's reduced our kind of cost of the operation, but critically it's reduced our cost of adding a new partner and the time of doing so. So, you know, it used to take us a number of months to kind of go around that cycle. And actually there were some deals that just weren't worth doing because the cost of doing it didn't kind of merit the value of the contract. Whereas now actually we can do that in about a week. So, you know, it significantly changed that. And then just another quick example, and this is something we're kind of actively working on at the moment. We have a lot of what we call late and live content. So obviously live content, but late is things which are very topical programs produced quite late. And with the workflow we've got at the moment, very often those assets need to go, today they go straight to play out. And so they don't necessarily come directly in through our VOD preparation pipeline. Whereas normally for any other content, we actually have one pipeline for everything. And these things, they have to kind of bypass that because they're arriving very, very late on. And one of the challenges we've had is to try and get that content onto our platforms and indeed our partners' platforms as soon as possible. And there's kind of an ideal hotspot window straight after the program is finished that you really want to target. And with our current system, that's been a real challenge in terms of being able to achieve that. And the new method, which is a combination of using some new tooling, which is in the cloud, but also that scalability point, what we've actually been able to do is not only kind of change the workflow and improve that, but actually we can target particular production, say, right, this is a really important piece for us. We can put more compute power effectively into that area and just shrink the processing time that we have in that area. And I think some key considerations for me are, I think it's really important to think about the content journey. As we've been doing this, we've been trying not to just look at any one particular component on that chain in isolation, actually say, because there's a danger actually if you do that you can be bouncing backwards and forwards between on-prem and the cloud, and that actually adds time, and it can add cost and complexity. So we've been trying to think much more end-to-end. How can we kind of lift the whole workflow and move it up there?
May I ask, have you been experimenting with remote workstations at all in order to be able to minimize the back and forth?
We're just beginning to do that. We haven't really done much on it yet.
Still early days on that.
Yeah. It's an interesting area. I think the other point I kind of made earlier is don't look at this purely as I'm replacing on-prem infrastructure with cloud infrastructure. It does open up opportunities to operate in a different way, and I think it's really important to do that because actually that's where a lot of the business value comes from, actually, rather than just treating cloud purely as an alternative hosting mechanism. I think work out your route to the cloud. We've been doing that on that chart. You can see that. We've said actually that there are some really prime areas for us to do this. There are other areas which I think they're a bit further off, and we're comfortable with that, actually, about that journey. A vital point here about engineering skill sets. It's a very different skill set you need. We've got really, really capable Linux platform engineers now who are creating that automated cloud platform with all the monitoring that's needed on that. And it is and in terms of architects as well, it's a very different skill set. And I think my last point, I don't think it is all possible yet, but I do believe it is just a matter of time.
Thanks, Tom. We'll have an interim round of applause for Tom, but we're going to pass the baton now to Thomas to take us through what's going on at Fox Networks. And I know you've been a huge advocate of embracing IP technology, and I'm kind of interested to see how that links through into cloud, because I think sometimes those two get a bit interlinked. They're obviously closely associated, but they're also different things. So how's cloud working for you?
And right now, there's slightly different use cases out there. We've been a big proponent of uncompressed IP for ultra low latency live production, right? And right now, that's not very cloudy. I'm sure it will be over time. In fact, it's almost not very virtualized, not very software based yet. But again, that's the goal. That's where we're going. So we're kind of holding off on that for now. But there are a lot of other things that we can do with cloud. So first of all, I'm not sure I believe those numbers on that survey, because you're going to tell me nobody's using Gmail in any of those companies, nobody's using Office 365.
That's a good point.
Everybody's already using the cloud, whether you think you are or not. And we are using a ton of cloud apps. I think this is your first step into the world of cloud. We use Quip for document collaboration. In fact, that's how I organized all of our vendor meetings at IBC this year. We had a big Quip spreadsheet with 10 different people putting in what they need to do and all the different vendors, so we knew didn't have duplicate meetings and things like that. We use Slack for chat. Now we have a better real-time interaction between our teams. We use Dropbox for file sharing. We use Reach Engine for video content management, especially for third-party producers, stringers for Fox Sports who are sending in videos for shows. They can all be organized in that fashion. And then Zoom for video conferencing. So when we have to get our technical teams together and discuss complex issues, we have a nice, dependable solution that is not dependent on a special teleconferencing room or something along those lines. Of course, there's a shot here from The Simpsons, old man yelling at the cloud, ah! So for file-based workflows, that's kind of the next step. And we've been working with a company called SDVI in order to try to orchestrate cloud-based file processing. So I'll say this is part of that agility and part of that new project effort. So could we have built this on-prem? We could have, but since it was a new project, it's very easy to just reach out into the cloud and start automating some of these functions, which in the past has been manual, right? We've always had content quality checking and content normalization, transcoding, and captioning, but it's been done by manual processes. I'm going to use this QC system, this transcoder, and this captioner, and I'm going to be moving these files using FTP by people typing command lines and things like that. That all needs to go away. We need to get to an automated solution. So why don't we spin this all up on the cloud, have a organizational system which can make this all happen, and by the way, put that orchestration system all together using Docker containers. So even though we're on AWS today, if we need to go on
Open source.
Google or Azure or something else, we can just slide it, or we want to bring it back on-prem. We could bring those Docker containers back on-prem. So today we have a system where we have media file workflows for the National Geographic channels. And this includes Nat Geo, Nat Geo Mundo, Nat Geo Wild. And we're just beginning to ramp up on the Fox Broadcast Network as well as FX. So program producers send their files to us using Aspera or Signient accelerated file transfer systems. They end up in the cloud, and then they go through QC and transcoding and normalization. Our producers also put in metadata through a ServiceNow portal, and that metadata is married up with the files on the cloud. We have some other mechanisms for bypassing that if they're not able to get access to the portal. And then all of this is done using Okta single sign-on. So this ensures that the security model is simple and scalable, and it's easy to add new people onto the solution. And so after the files have been processed on the cloud, they're sent again through Signient or Aspera back to the Fox Network Center, along with distribution-ready BXF metadata. So this is the metadata that our traffic and automation systems need to know how to get those files played back at the right time on our systems. So this has been very exciting. It's been a journey, and I'd say the toughest part we've been running into is some of those best-of-breed software companies. We've had to work with them to cloud enable their software. Things like there is no dongle in the cloud, right? Simple things like that. And then business models. In the past, you would buy transcoding software for X amount of dollars. Now we're asking them to say, we need a business model where you're going to charge us for the amount of time we're using that transcoder. So, some days we might not use any transcoders, and some days we might need to use thousands of transcoders. And you've got to change your business model to meet our needs. And it's been a conversation, and we've got some great results, I think. But obviously, this is going to be a continuous problem as more software moves onto the cloud. And yes, we do have a little bit of live stuff beginning to move onto the cloud now. If you were in that previous group of folks who are speaking, you saw Brian Sullivan talking about all the new digital MVPDs which are coming online. And we've had to find a way to serve all these digital MVPDs. Existing MVPDs have collection facilities for broadcast television stations across the United States. The digital MVPDs don't have that infrastructure. So we need to make that happen for them. So we have over 200 Fox broadcast affiliates, and we've had to find a way to get their content to these digital MVPDs. And there's a kicker here in that we also have to make sure that materials whose rights are limited either in geography or in time have to be indicated so that if viewers are watching outside of that geography or outside of that time, that they either have a blackout or they have alternative content. So we have a system now working with Harmonic VOS running on AWS where local schedules come from the local stations. They're merged with the national schedules coming from our national networks. And also local stations will put in those restrictions, those geographic, temporal, and other restrictions on some of that content which is restricted. That all goes up to the VOS cloud along with the play commands from the local affiliates, and also their actual video has to come across the internet, which we use reliable internet stream transports to move that over the internet into AWS cloud. And then in the cloud, it's all merged up, and those restrictions are sent to the digital MVPDs using ESNI, the Event Signaling and Notification Interface, also known as SCUDdy 224. This is a great system, little XML representations of all of these restrictions on the content, and that ends up at the digital MVPTs along with the actual video as a transport stream with the SCUDY35 markers for the ad insertion. And this allows these digital MVPTs to ramp up very quickly. So that's what we've really been doing with cloud. And again, we've not been replacing a lot of our real core infrastructure. We've got core competencies of content distribution and making content, but as we have new things come along, new projects, and we need to get them up and running quickly, that's where the real benefit has been. So I'd say, it's agility, it's new projects, and it's also logging and analytics, because when you do something on a cloud, you have wonderful data about everything you're doing, including pricing information. So the next time somebody wants to do something, you can come back and say, well, I know exactly how much that's going to cost because we did it before, and here's the bill from the cloud provider, and we can tell you exactly how much that's going to cost again. So.
Thomas, thank you. Simon, I'm going to come to you in just a second, but I'm just going to take a question that's come up through the IBC app, which I think is one that comes up very frequently in people's minds when they're considering cloud. And the question is kind of a twofold thing. Security of content and bandwidth costs. We hear those issues time and time again, and I know, Jeff, you touched on that, and Tom, you also did, and you talked about security, for example, in terms of authentication, but these problems do, or these issues do still kind of loom high in people's minds when they're thinking about this journey to cloud. So I'm interested just kind of very briefly how you've embraced those topics and made sure that your content is secure and that you're not racking up a huge bill, whether it's from Google Cloud or from AWS or from Azure, because you're moving content back and forth all the time.
Well, I can say that any cloud provider has physical security that's probably better than our physical security, right? So that's the first step. And again, as I mentioned, there's no dongle, there's no USB drive to stick into a virtual machine either, and that's half of your virus problems right there. So the security is inherently there. You have to be cautious about what you're doing, but frankly, you've got to be cautious with your security on-prem too. So it's not like it's anything unusual. You've got to secure your virtual systems the same way you secure your on-prem systems. So I don't think there's that much of a difference. And there was a concern about bandwidth costs. Bandwidth costs may be negotiable. Talk to your cloud provider, because I think a lot of these bandwidth costs have been built for a typical enterprise, and as cloud providers are dealing with media companies, they're recognizing that it's probably too high for a media company, and you might be able to work something out.
I think I'd agree with you. I think in terms of kind of innate security, you guys wouldn't be in business if it wasn't a secure platform. And that's true for AWS and the others. And I would challenge whether or not, at our much smaller scale, whether we could compete with that level of security and actually achieve that. But you're absolutely right. Ultimately, at the end, you've then got to put the security measures around your particular implementation, and but that's exactly the same whether you're in the cloud or whether you're on premise. Arguably, possibly, it's a bit easier to do that in the cloud, I think. And back to your monitoring point, it's much easier to see what's happening in terms of the kind of monitoring and alerting that you can get. And I agree with you. I think the bandwidth question. There's two things. One of the points I says, you've actually got to think about what's that kind of end-to-end workflow, and some of that you can just engineer out, some of that challenge. But I think you're right. There's a negotiation point about
and Jeff, you showed us the great slide with all the fiber that Google is laying under the ocean. Presumably, then that's going to help in terms of enabling that content to get in and out quickly, but ultimately cost-effectively.
Absolutely, yeah. Because we have more than 100 points of presence globally, we're peered into really every ISP and every major city on the planet. So in that context, you have an on-ramp right there. From a cost standpoint, we offer a premium tier, which means if you're pulling the data out of Helsinki and reading it in Los Angeles, for instance, you're going to be on our private network the entire way across. However, there's a standard tier available that will come out of the data center and drop it right onto the public internet immediately. And so those two different tiers are available. We're trying to listen to broadcast customers and other customers with similar use cases excuse me, to be able to come up with pricing models that work and make sense. And oftentimes, and I just want to encourage people, come to us with your problem in terms of, hey, we need better egress, or I don't need the private network because these packets aren't that important to me. It's you know, or you know, from a latency standpoint, we can tolerate a slightly higher latency on the public internet than the private. We have products internally, and that's one of the things my team does from an engineering standpoint is externalize internal IP to make it available to enterprise customers.
And actually, just on that, I think with security as well. I mean, from being the little guy, independent, I think when we moved to the cloud, security and on-site, because contractually you're obliged to have different backups in different locations, and some of those backups don't have nowhere near the level of security where our cloud is. I think we've got a few guys with machine guns guarding our data center. I mean, I can't afford to have that sort of.
You don't employ men with machine guns?
No, not at our office, but come to my house. That's another story. Yeah. But I think it comes. I'm sure we've all had conversations. I think traditional producers and broadcasters and whatever. I think there is something about seeing where your data is, and I think that's just a cultural thing that will go with time.
So Simon, you may be the little guy as you described it, but actually I suppose that also gives you a great deal of flexibility. And in your business, which is a little different from Tom and Thomas's, who are more focused around being a broadcast network, you're around creating content and post-producing that content. And you've made a huge kind of shift towards embracing cloud, which presumably as a small company has helped you kind of gain a lot of advantages.
Yeah, I mean, I think we made a huge pivot a few years ago, because as I was an editor, for a decade, and I, at the same time, I was growing a post-production facility and grew a team of editors, and it was great fun doing that. But when you're growing a business like that, you're always bolting on new edit suites, new technology, and it just got to the point where I'm sure you've all got problems where there's a problem, and you're like, well, which one is the problem? Is it the firmware? Is it the hardware? And so we were at a point where we ripped everything out, or I wanted to rip everything out and just start again. And I think at that point, it wasn't just a case of, hey, let's build another edit facility. It was like, hang on a minute, what is the relevance of having a post facility today and in the next few years? Because the industry has changed. You've got to remember, it's only 10 years ago or so that YouTube launched, but that has changed things, I think. And we, you say as a creative, we're responding to this sort of data, where as a traditional post facility, we were actually seeing our workload changing quite considerably to digital content. And as such, we also were diversifying our business to be broader than just post-production, but actually producing content. And so we've sort of pivoted from being a traditional post facility and into being a content production agency.
And what you're looking at here then is, if YouTube was a TV channel in the UK, it would be one of the big ones.
Exactly, yeah. And so when you're producing the content aside, if you're providing a post service, how does that make what we can do different? And so is this working? Oh, there you go. Yeah, and I think, and also where people are viewing it as well, because they're not viewing it on traditional TV as such. Mobile technology is where we're going. So we've hugely pivoted to that, and that, not just in a commercial way, but also we've started working directly with brands. And I think what's really interesting is looking at some of these stats, where web traffic will be video, 85% of it will be video content by 2020. And businesses are changing very, very quickly to pivot to some of these changes. So I guess we got to the point where we were saying, why wouldn't we change, as much as these guys on a much bigger scale? And you think, well, how can we change to be more relevant as a business? So I think when we looked at changing our business model, it wasn't just a case of building a new hardware. We looked at our NLE system. We moved everything to Adobe, because we were finding that that had more flexibility, and we could build in more capability into our post facilities. And then we also there we go, it's like a home from home. And that was a game, again, and that, I think it was the mindset really, rather than just thinking, hey, can we how can we get more back, more storage and push it up to the cloud? Actually, it was, how can we innovate around that and think, well, how is that going to be better for the clients that we work with? And so, we started looking at uploading content directly from shoots. Obviously you've got to find a fast upload speed, but that, trying to eradicate too many people coming to us with, hard drives that have been at the bottom of their bag for a few days, and they start whirring when you plug them in, and you're like, oh, this isn't going to go too well. So I think it was more than just putting cloud into our business. It wasn't just servicing it. It was thinking, well, how is this going to rethink how we do it? And I think what we've done with that now is, say, from production, we've done that, and I think one of the advantages of using Adobe for us as well was using team projects, and that's enabled essentially our facility, which has half a dozen suites and voiceover suite in Soho. But then now, because we point everything to our cloud and put all our data on the cloud, it's meant that we're no longer constrained by bricks and mortar of Soho in London. We actually started outsourcing our work to all around the world. So it's been a great story for us. Not just with storage but with software. And this just gives you an idea of now. We're working with editors not just in our facility in London, but we're actually now looking at a whole network. So I know the technical side of it is fascinating, because I'm sat again, wow, this is great to see what's coming. But for me, it's the application, the mindset of changing your workflow to a cloud-based workflow. And it's meant that, yeah, we can use editors. I mean, we're talking to editors in San Francisco, specialist animators in Singapore. So our small indies have suddenly got this global capability, and that's quite exciting. And then also when we start talking to brands about that, and we can say to them, look, be great to put a pop-up edit facility, short term, into their business, because brands now are becoming their own broadcasters. They don't need to go to broadcasters and or big, behemoth agencies. They are pivoting as well to upskill their in-house content teams and working with partners, like us, who can enable them to actually think a bit differently about content, and they will become the new commissioners. It won't be, traditional broadcasters. They will be commissioning content, and I think and so if they're doing that, how are we servicing that model? And I think they want to move away also from getting huge bills from facilities. They don't really understand that world, but if you can bring it into their space. And the technology is now there to do it, So it's been quite an exciting. We've seen quite an exciting change in our business and how we talk to some of our clients, and some of the productions we've done recently have been, really interesting.
So it's interesting because a lot of the discussion when we start talking about cloud gets into questions like we had a moment ago. It's costs and bandwidth, and actually, what's coming out very clearly to me is that the exciting stuff is not the cost and the bandwidth, although that's important to understand. It's actually the power of cloud in terms of how it can change your business fundamentally, the agility. We saw some interesting tools from Google that potentially allows content creators just to do new stuff. And Tom and Thomas, I've seen how you're effectively kind of re-architecting your business around being able to work in a different way. So do you think we should just, in our thinking, just move away from worrying about where cloud is and how much it costs and the mechanics of it, and should we just be focused on the art of the possible?
Yeah, I mean, you can't forget about costs, because at the end of the day, that's something you've got to manage. But I think you're right; that's not the kind of objective of it all, not by any sense. You've got to think about that in terms of how you're managing that, because otherwise, the cost can get. If you're using it badly, like anything else, you've got to use it in the right way. If you use it badly, then then the costs can go up. But I think it is much more about what is the capability it's enabling. We know that we're. I gave a couple of examples there. We know we're moving workloads to the cloud, and in the process we are kind of reimagining the way that they work. But we know that once we're there are all sorts of capabilities that we're not actually tapping into yet, which we will be able to tap into, which would be much harder to do if we were keeping a whole load of this, if you like, in a data center and then trying to move it into the cloud so you could take advantage of machine learning or whatever, and then that's just...
And I suppose as broadcasters, some of your new competitors are inherently cloud-native Silicon Valley companies. So does that kind of weigh into the thinking at all?
Yeah, obviously, if you look at someone like Netflix, who does so much of their processing on the cloud, you have to say, well, maybe they've got the right idea.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, people come up and they say, oh, so how much is this cloud saving you? And there's no good answer to that. It's that it allows you to do things that you couldn't easily do without cloud. And we've seen this in the broadcast industry before. Non-linear editing allowed you to do things that linear editing could never do. Did it save money? I don't know. Broadcast automation, right? The people would say, okay, we're going to automate all of our broadcast operations, then we're going to fire all of our operators. Turns out we didn't fire all of our operators. We just have now hundreds of more channels, right? So I think it's enabling a more agile business. And again, I think if you do it right, it can be a more predictive business. So you will know how much money you're spending. And in some ways, it's difficult. If you walk into your broadcast center, how much do the lights cost? How much does the air conditioning cost? How much does the guard outside cost, right? It's actually hard to answer these questions, where on the other hand, it's all in the cloud bill, when it comes to you.
I think it sort of eradicates, human inefficiencies, but we're going to see that, as we look more to AI and automated process, we're going to see it, but that doesn't mean the end of certain jobs. It produces new parts to it. I mean, it's funny what Jeff was saying about LTO. I mean, that's
you all smiled when he talked about that. I know.
Yeah, well, because I think for us, like as an indie, like you've got years ago, before when tapeless just started, that really started the journey, I think, to cloud technology, because that's what created the problem. When you had directors. When producers going out on Digibeat, they had 32 minutes, and so they were careful when they yelled action. And then as soon as people just plugged in a 4 GB card and they just hit record and be like, oh, it's all right, But then the knock-on effects to that was that you needed more hard drives, which gave more risk of things breaking. You needed bigger server space, which when people started shooting in HD and 4K, when they didn't even need to, it's just creating more faster. So what do you do and that was the decision we made. What do you do? Do you buy just more racks of hard drives, or do you think there's got to be an efficient way of doing this? And I think at the same time as all that was happening, internet speeds got faster, storage got smaller, and so we are where we are. And I think so it's natural progression really and I think it's certainly for us, I think it enables us now not just to cope with the growing businesses, and content is only. There's going to be more produced. So I think you've kind of got to be agile enough to switch to that.
So I've got a couple more questions coming in, which are both, I think, again, really interesting questions. The first one's quite a quick one, and maybe probably one for Jeff in the first instance. Is it important to have a cloud provider's data center physically close to where you are to minimize latency and get the maximum bandwidth? And I know, Simon, when we've spoken in the past, you've raised the issue that connectivity into the cloud can be a pain. So that's an even bigger pain, perhaps, if you're not based in Western Europe or North America. So does it matter?
Well, sort of. It depends on the workload. So we have customers who are 150 milliseconds away from the data center. They're southern hemisphere, and they're running in central U.S. And they're doing that because we had a lot of capacity there that they could use, and they were even running remote desktop sessions. It's surprisingly good. I think that people are really focused on latency in terms of milliseconds, but that's typically over the public internet. And when you do it over a private connection, where you have QoS and other services that are really prioritizing those packets for you, where they tend not to be retransmitted, then it feels smoother. You start getting into speed of light issues rather than general congestion issues and vagaries of that. So, however, in responding to customers that do have, there are specific workloads. If you want to do a DI suite or a Mari Paint Pass, or there are specific workloads that do benefit from the latency. So we have the ability to, in larger markets like Los Angeles, Southern California, for instance, we'll be lighting up next year with a data center there that will allow you to run, single-digit milliseconds for those workloads.
And Tom and Thomas, you're fortunate, and indeed Simon, you are as well. You're all fortunate to be in big metropolis areas, so connectivity is not so much of an issue. But do you have to kind of think about which cloud region to use?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have with AWS is Direct Connect, and I think this is, and Jeff, what's the equivalent?
We have the equivalent. Yeah, we have a Direct Connect product as well, either directly to us or through a partner.
Right. But basically, I think if you're getting serious about doing something in cloud, you do need to have some type of direct connection to the cloud provider. And generally, you can get this if you're with a major carrier already. You know, I know Level 3 is a big carrier for us. Your carrier probably has a situation where they can bring you directly to a data center, and then from that data center, you know, hop from their cage over to the cloud provider's cage. So that's a very you know, low latency, low packet loss connection. Now, that doesn't mean it's a no packet loss connection, right? But there is still tends to be no real SLAs on these things, but they're a heck of a lot better than just going across the general internet to your cloud provider.
Great. Now, we have 5 minutes left and a really complicated question, and I want to leave time at the end to ask one final question. So this is going to be the quick answer to this, and probably thinking of it from a business mindset rather than getting into the technicalities. But the question from Bob is around the difference or the trade-off between public cloud and private cloud, and we also hear hybrid cloud. I'm not sure I understand fully the differences between those, and I guess a lot of other people don't. Is private cloud, is hybrid cloud real cloud? What are the trade-offs between the agility and cost and performance in that? But that's going to be a 10-second answer for each of you, if you could.
Wow, yeah, answering that in 10 seconds is pretty tough because I think it's quite complicated. I think first we've got to say, what do you mean by cloud? You know, is cloud just somebody else's data center? That's one way of defining it, but I don't think it is that. You know, I think for me, cloud is infrastructure as code. It's about the commercial model. You know, it's about the capabilities of that cloud. You know, there is private cloud, and there are at the moment some instances I think where that wins out, which may be particularly where it's questions of the egress cost or about the kind of compute. But that's a purely economical factor, and I think that will probably go away if I'm honest. I think beyond that, it's really a question of you know, what the kind of capabilities you're looking for.
Yeah, and there are things that we do on our private virtualized data center. You know, obviously when you got 20 million people watching the NFL, you get a little scared to put that onto a third party, right? So there's some things that we keep in-house, but then there's some other projects like file-based processing that, you know what, if it went down for 5 minutes, we'd be okay. So that kind of stuff is a lot easier to push out on the public cloud. I think we would like to get to a situation where we can move those workflows fairly seamlessly from our data center to a public data center. But the truth is, it is true, once you get on a public cloud, you do get a little addicted to it. It's a little hard to move off, but we're trying to figure out how to do that.
Simon, any thoughts on that?
No, I think I think these guys. I think you know it's kind of depending on what you're trying to do, and also this you know part of it's security as well, and how much you know, because I think more and more. I'm sure you guys would have it too, where clients who do understand this process are asking, where is this being stored? And I think that's when you know public or private actually becomes a data protection issue as well.
So to wrap up then, I guess a lot of the reason that people have come today to the session is because they're interested in embarking on their own journey or continuing their own journey to cloud. So I'd just kind of like to get to close, your kind of key piece of advice that you would share with a broadcaster or a media or content company in terms of the key thing that they should think about as they embrace and adopt cloud. And Jeff, maybe you can start.
I was just going to touch on the previous question as well and say on my laptop there's a sticker that says there is no cloud, it's just someone else's computer. So I personally don't tend to think in terms of public versus private versus just, for me, cloud is massively scalable. And if the cloud you're talking about is not massively scalable, then it doesn't meet that basic definition in my mind.
Good point.
But in terms of advice for broadcasters in 12 seconds or less, really it's come on in, the water's fine. Try not to look at what we're offering today. Try and come to us with interesting models and interesting requests. There's a bunch of tech that we have that we don't let out, but we're interested in doing that. So bring us neat problems.
Tom, ITV's still on air. It must be working for you.
Yeah, it's working. I would say embrace it, find some way to jump in, learn from it, and then expand your way from there.
I think there's a lot of learning that has to happen to utilize it well, but you know, let your mind wander, let your mind imagine what you could do on cloud, and I think that's the best thing to do. It's something you can do there that you can't do in your private data center.
Yeah, and look, you know, for aspiring businesses that are growing, I think you've got to have this in place because it gives you that scalability. I think, you know, as Linda, you're always worrying about costs, and you know, for us, we've rediverted our costs from more storage to a faster internet connection, and we subscribe to cloud. You know, and you're constantly going against that thing of like costs are going one way. How do you know, create that curve? And I think that by putting things into a cloud-based workflow, it gives you that agility for scalability, which inevitably is going to enable growth for your business.
Great. Well, I'm grateful to all of you for sharing your insights, both in terms of some of the capabilities of one of the leading cloud providers, but to me, I think the most fascinating thing has been to explore how you've been really using it in the real world to create and manage content. So I'm sure you'd like to join me in thanking the panel: Jeff Kember from Google Cloud Platform, Tom Griffiths from ITV, Thomas Edwards from Fox Networks, and Simon Green from GreenRock. Thank you very much for joining us on the panel today.
Great, look at that. Right on time.